let's talk about how to identify a crisis. Crisis certainly is part of something we probably need to discuss as we think about mental disorders, isn't it?
Well, this is, I think, will lead us into a place that's hard for people to sit through and to hear some of these things. And so sensitivity around this matters, right? When we are talking about a mental health crisis, you'll hear language like that person had a nervous breakdown, or that's usually the most common one that you hear. And everyone, what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And typically what that means, I think first and foremost, as a mental health practitioner, I think crisis when I think for whatever reason this person has gotten into the place where there's some risk to themselves or to someone else, meaning a risk of their very life. And so I'm always looking for that possibility. Are we in this place where they might be a risk to themselves or to someone else? As a mental health practitioner, I'm going to say that's the truest crisis. But secondary to that would be places where people become so emotionally overwhelmed that their emotions are out of control and they can't rein them in for some length of time, or their emotions become so shut down that they can't even participate in life. And that really stops their daily functioning. And they've just stopped participating, and they stop going to work, they stop engaging in relationships. We even see they stop eating, they stop drinking, right? They might stop sleeping, or they may sleep all the time. Or sometimes what we'll see is they stop self-care. And so they stop bathing, they stop brushing their teeth, they stop taking care of their very basic needs. And in all of those cases, when I see this, that is a time that we need to get help pretty immediately for that person.
Yeah, so let's talk about that. If we see someone that we might identify in crisis,
right,
what's the best way to respond, and what do we say in those moments?
Mm-hmm. I think, again, first being curious, asking some questions, the things that we might do to de-escalate somebody emotionally, having that conversation, letting them share what they're thinking about. If we do that and they're not able to do that, or they don't begin to calm down a little bit when we do that, in addition to all of these problems in functioning, then I think we need to reach out and get help. Typically what I would say to the person, and I'll say this a little bit later, is, as we've been talking here, I'm really concerned about your well-being, and I really want to make sure that you're going to be okay. And I think maybe we need to call in somebody who can help you with this, because it's beyond what I know how to do. And so can we together, and I would typically say that, can we together call the mental health crisis line, or can we call, a counselor? Can we go together to the emergency room? Something like that, to get them to that next level of help.
Yeah. Can we together do this?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about something that is difficult to talk about, no doubt, for all of us. And some of us who may be watching this have experienced someone who has taken their own life through suicide. Talk to us about that in particular. You mentioned part of the crisis is recognizing if someone may be a harm to themselves as well as to others, but particularly to themselves. Let's talk about that right now.
We know that, at least here in the United States, that death by suicide is the second leading cause of death among adults. And so this is a significant problem. Yeah. There are subgroups where this is more of a problem than other subgroups, but it really is something that we need to keep an eye out for. When I'm working with people, I'm looking always for a few things. And I think that these are things that all of us should be looking for, and often we'll talk about, sudden changes in behavior. So if the person starts giving away their most cherished things, that's usually a sign that something's happening. Or if they start talking about death a lot, that might be a sign that something's going on. They may become agitated or very depressed, or they might have been agitated and depressed, and now all of a sudden they seem relieved and happy again. That's usually, well, not usually, but that could be a sign that they've made a decision to take their own life. When I'm talking to someone, though, and I'm listening to them, I'm listening for a few themes. The first theme that I'm listening for is hopelessness. Many people have said that hopelessness is the number one predictor of suicidal ideation, right? And you can imagine when you feel like there's no way out, right? This is never going to get better. I'm going to be stuck here forever. Then the only option seems to become ending it somehow. But along with that, people also tend to have a sense of being a burden to others, right? Not only am I stuck and there's no way out, but I've become a burden to my friends and my family, and I don't want to do that anymore. And so when I hear these things, I am always going to ask the next question. And I really think all of us need to ask that next question. And the way that we do this, right, is I would say in psychological lingo, I want to normalize it. And so I might pick up on whatever the person is expressing or experiencing and say something like, John, I know you have really been struggling over these past few weeks, and life is really feeling hard for you. Sometimes when people are in this place that you're in, they start having thoughts about taking their own life. Are you having any of those thoughts? And so what I've just done and saying it that way is to say it's completely expected that this might be true for you. So if it's true for you, it's not a big deal, right?
Yeah.
And that gives the person then permission to say, yeah, actually, I am having some of those thoughts.
Yeah. And when you say normalize, you're not saying, some people hear that and think you're saying that that's good. Again,
No.
We're not saying that's good. You're saying that it could be expected that certain people in this space may go to that place of wanting to end their own life. And so you're giving that person permission to confess.
Yes.
As we've kind of discussed in another session. And so one of the things that I think is really important of what you're saying here is it's okay to ask.
Yes.
And sometimes I think we might think if we ask, we're planting something into somebody's mind that wouldn't be there. So we might be tempted to either withdraw or ignore it or just pretend it's not there. But you're saying ask.
Ask the question. People are not going to say, you know what? I've not thought about that. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
That's not going to be the response. The response is going to be, wow, you care about me.
Yeah.
Right. And so I don't think we need to be afraid. Now, if we ask the question in a way that's rude or condescending, then you might get a bad response. But generally, people almost always read that as a question of care.
Yeah.
Right. Now, the answer that you get, sometimes people will say yes. Sometimes they might say, well, not really. And what we hear, like if you ask the follow-up question, well, tell me a little bit about what you have been thinking and feeling. I may hear from someone nothing that relates to that at all. I may hear, and probably the most common thing that we hear would be thoughts of death. I wish that I wouldn't wake up in the morning.
Yeah.
I wish that something would happen to me, right? I wish that somehow my life would end. There's no intentionality of taking that action themselves, but there's this desire to be set free in a sense. Yeah. Those kind of thoughts, I would say, don't concern me as much because they are really common across people, particularly people who are depressed. It's when people begin to think about how they might make that end come about, right? And they begin to develop a plan. I say all of that as a clinician, I'm hearing the distinctions.
Yeah.
It's scary for people who aren't clinicians to go, should I be worried about this or should I not be worried about that? And so I think the best course of action when we hear from someone that they really are thinking about death and they're thinking, they're having that kind of what I would call suicidal ideation or even thoughts of death would be to say, I hear you and I know that you must really be struggling to have these thoughts. And I'm concerned about you. Let's together call this number or call this person and see if we can get some help on how we walk together in the future in this. And in that, here in the United States, we would call the suicide hotline, which is 988, or we would call one of the other mental health crisis lines to get some help. Other areas of the world have other resources that they can contact. But getting somebody in who is trained to do the risk assessment and to do the intervention if it needs to happen, that's really what you want to do.
Yeah.
Now I will have people say, but if I do that, my friend is going to get mad at me. It might be true. And what I say back to them is, I would rather my friend be angry with me and alive than my friend not be with me anymore.
Right.
And generally what they find is once they talk to somebody that wasn't as scary and threatening as in their mind they thought that it was, and they understand that my friend was trying to help me, and we can move forward from there, particularly if we walk with them in that journey.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think you said something a little bit ago about how people might see themselves as a burden to their loved ones. I know some researchers and there's theories on this, but have said that coupled with the idea of I'm a liability and I'm a burden is a really strong catalyst of moving into this direction. And I think that's important for this reason. Sometimes when I've heard of someone who's taken their life, others may say, well, what they did is selfish. But I think it's important to recognize to the people that are left behind, it certainly is going to feel selfish. So we don't mitigate that at all. Of course it feels that way to them. But to realize that really in the mind of the other person that took their life, they felt like they were doing what they thought was loving for everyone else that was around them.
They were removing the burden of themselves from their loved ones' lives.
And so I think it's important as we even think about care for the ones who are left, if that ever should happen, how we talk about that's really important to them as well, as we help them go through that suffering, because they're going to grieve and they're going to have questions along the way as well that likely will never have an answer, by the way. And that can be difficult for us.
And there's a stigma. And so they're afraid to talk about it.
That's right.
Right. And so again, there's that grieving that happens in private, in the shadows. And again, if it's not brought out into the light, people generally don't move through that well. But how do we talk about it? People will feel guilty. They will feel like I should have known. I should have seen the signs. Right. Or I shouldn't have had that argument with my loved one. Whatever it is, and they rehearse those events in their mind over and over and over and over again, trying to figure out why this happened.
Because it's normal for us to want to make sense. And we need it to make sense at some level, but sometimes it's just not possible. Ultimately, for us to put everything together in a nice, tight box with a bow on it. It just doesn't work that way, does it?
It really doesn't. It really doesn't. Now, I sometimes hear people talk about death by suicide as a sin. And I think we need to really push back from that. I would say that it is, in most cases, a mental illness, right? This person is so caught up and blinded by these emotions and these thoughts that they really, truly cannot see clearly.
Yeah.
Right. And they feel like they're drowning in this world and they need a way out. And I think we have to understand the depth of desperation that is in that, right? And that really feeling like I have no other choice.
Yeah.
That happens in people. It's not for most people. It's not there's nothing willful about it, right? It is, this is the only option I think I have.
Yeah. When all choices are eliminated in their mind, at least in their perception, this is the only thing left.
Right.
Yeah. And God's grace still meets us in our suffering.
Absolutely.
Even in those moments. And so we let God be God, even in these moments.
Yes.
Say God loves them, even still. So what happens in those moments? We really don't know.
Right.
We really don't know. But we know that God is good. And the character of God is something that we put our trust in.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's where our hope is.
Yeah.
These are difficult conversations. There are probably more people than we know who have been touched by suicide. I would say in our churches, there are a lot of people who have been touched by this that we have no clue. And if it's not suicide, then it's related behaviors.
Yeah.
Right. We know that, for example, self-harm is on the rise, and that can take all kinds of different forms. Usually it's in the form of cutting, but it can be in the form of burning oneself or, lots of other behaviors, hitting oneself, those kinds of things. And we would call those parasuicidal behaviors very often. Most of the time, they are not intended to take someone's life, right? They exist, and the function that they serve for the person is somewhat different than what suicide would do.
And let's just kind of move through this, and we're talking about self-harm or harm to oneself, but what also might we want to consider about a risk to others? You also mentioned that earlier. Is there anything that we might be able to see or know if someone could be a risk to other people?
I think when I have seen people who are risks to other people, they begin talking about someone that they want to physically harm. There's a sincerity to it. Now, we have to be careful because some cultures will use that physical language to talk about frustration or anger, right? Yeah. And so sometimes when people say, I could just kill them, they don't really mean that they want to kill them. They mean I'm frustrated, right? And so I always want to kind of feel that out when I talk to somebody. But if someone is saying, no, I'm serious, this person, I want to hurt them, and this is what I'm going to do, that's another place where we need to call and get help with that. Yeah. That becomes a crisis. And in most states here in the United States, we are mandated by law to report that. And typically that would be a call to a crisis line and a call to the police in order to manage that.
Do you ask the question in this case similar as you might if someone might be a risk to themselves? Do you have a plan? Is that something that you would ask?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I might say, hey, John, you sound really angry and frustrated by this person. And it sounds like you might be having thoughts of how you can get revenge or how you can make them hurt too. Are you having some of those thoughts? And if, the person would say yes, then you say, tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Again, if I panic in that moment, if I get worried, if I get scared, if I start to get anxious, it's going to shut down the conversation. And so being cool, understanding that, this might be true. This person might really be having these thoughts and these intentions. But there is help that I can get. Yeah. Right. And it's not all on me to resolve that.
You're not alone in those moments. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And keeping that in mind is so critically important.
Right. Absolutely.